So Thulani, thank you very much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But before we walk into the future, can you tell us a little bit about your own background?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm so excited to share my thoughts on this very important subject. I was born and raised in Soweto,
Right.
and I'm one of four, and I'm the second. Grew up, went to school in Soweto.
Where about in Soweto?
In central western Jabavu.
Okay.
Yes, that's where I grew up. For people who know Soweto, that's close to where Morris Isaacson is.
Right.
And went to primary school, higher primary in Soweto. And then when I was about 13, I then went to boarding school in the Eastern Cape, a school called Bethel College.
Right.
I must admit it was not my first choice. I was encouraged by my dad to go to boarding school, and I did grade 10, 11, and 12 there. And those were the best and formative moments of my life.
Really?
Yes, and we'll come back to that as you wish. And then when I finished high school, having enjoyed the benefits of being away from Soweto, my comfort zone, I realized how much I had grown, and I decided that if being away from Soweto has grown me so much, then I have to be away from South Africa.
Okay.
I decided that I'm not going to go to university in South Africa, even though I qualified. I applied to a university in Lesotho and also a university in Zimbabwe. And the simple choice was that wherever I get scholarship first, that's where I'm going.
Right.
That's how I went to Zimbabwe to start my accounting degree at Solusi University. I did the first 2 years, a mind-opening experience in many ways, in that for the first time in my life, I had friends from outside the SADC area. Up until matric, outside South Africa, I only had friends from Swaziland, Lesotho, and Botswana. And in Zimbabwe, I had obviously Zimbabwean friends, Zambian friends, Malawian, Kenyans, Ethiopians, and so forth. That changed my orientation towards our wonderful continent. And then after 2 years, I once again decided that if, having gone across the border from South Africa had opened my eyes in the ways it did, why not cross the oceans? And I then got another scholarship, thankfully. I went on to finish my accounting degree in California.
Oh,
so
okay.
that's my accounting background, or rather my initial phase of life.
Sorry, just to go back to you said the best days were at boarding college.
Boarding school, yes.
Boarding school?
Yes.
Why were those years so special?
The boarding school time was special in many ways. Firstly, and most importantly, it was a moment of independence. For the first time, I had to make decisions on my own without the reliance on parents. The other profound thing about my experience at boarding school was my relationship with money. At school, I would from time to time receive pocket money from my parents. It was not a lot. Sometimes it would be 20 Rand, sometimes it would be 50 Rand. I never knew when it would be coming. I never knew how much it would be. So I had to be responsible with the money I had, and decide how long I make it stretch, including how to buy chocolate for my girlfriend at the time. So those are the first two items. The third element, which was the main reason why I decided to go further and further away from the comfort zone, I was exposed to different cultures. For the first time, I interacted closely with people from KZN,
Right.
people from the East and the Western Cape, and we had some people from Botswana and so forth. And just interfacing with different cultures, starting to have to open up to other views other than your own. And also, when you come from Soweto, it's a blessing and a curse. At the time, we thought we knew it all. And then when you start seeing how other people view the world, that was positive. Yeah. So, and just doing things for myself.
Right.
Yeah.
And who inspired you in those early days?
In the early days, my role model was really my dad. I looked up to him in many ways. And then I had different friends that tended to be older than I was. And I just observed and learned different things from them.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't recall a time when I had a celebrated personality as a role model per se, but it was within a close circle.
So you say you finished accounting?
Yes, so I finished my accounting degree at the end of 1992, ready to go and become a chartered accountant. I applied for articles, and PwC came back to me and said, we like you, but our intake for articles is full for this year. Can you come next year? And instantly I said, I don't have the luxury of waiting another year. I needed to start working and earning an income. And I simply asked myself a question: after accounting, what else did I enjoy at varsity? And after some reflection, I realized that the second preference in the many courses that I took for my degree was marketing. The summer courses that I had taken in the last year of my accounting degree included a communication project where I presented on the launch of the Gillette Sensor for Women, which was quite a revolution at the time and a breakthrough in many ways. And I remembered how I felt about this wonderful innovation and how the Gillette company was taking it to market. I said, well, if it's not accounting, maybe I would do that. And indeed, within a couple of weeks, having applied to different companies, I received an offer from Unilever, but I was more keen to join Gillette. I went with the offer from Unilever. I said, guys, I'm keen to join you. Just let me know whether I should keep waiting or I should just take the Unilever offer. They said, no, you're kidding us. You join Gillette.
Good.
And that's how I started my marketing career in 1993.
So Thulani, would you say it's fair to say that innovation is marketing and marketing is innovation, especially today?
Very related, extremely. And I cannot imagine marketing without innovation.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, what exactly did you do at Gillette? Can you share the highlights?
I spent a fair bit of time at Gillette, and I started as a management trainee or marketing assistant. I don't remember the titles then. But some of the highlights I recall was repositioning the Gillette series range. It was a range of male grooming products that included deodorants, shaving preparations, and post-shave products. I think based on the strength of the Gillette name, we had launched the range at an extremely high premium versus their respective competitors. The price of our deodorants for Gillette series was way, way high, and yet it didn't have the credentials that it had in shaving. So we did a few things, talking to customers, a bit of research, and then a big part of the repositioning was reviewing the pricing, among other things. Another key highlight while working for the Gillette company was when I was responsible for the Oral-B brand. And for the first time, and relatively briefly, I don't think it was much longer than a year, we overtook Colgate as market leader in toothbrushes. Colgate was a formidable player, right. And it was quite significant when we were able to overtake Colgate as a market leader. So that was an awesome milestone. And I think the third and final milestone that I recall fondly while working for Gillette was when I had a regional role based in the UK. Right. We committed to double the business in 3 years, and indeed at the end of the 3 years we had grown the business more than an average of about 25-26% and had doubled the business. So that was quite an
achievement.
Yes.
So Thulani, just to backtrack, what would you say was, when you grew up, what was your dream career? Did you have a dream career?
Yes, I did. From the time that I did what is today called grade 8,
right,
I was determined that one day I was going to be a chartered accountant.
Right.
So from grade 8 through 12, I chose commercial subjects and I chose accounting as the lead. And I was convinced that I was going to be an accountant. I went on to do my 4-year degree in accounting. And when I look back to it, the reason why I wanted to be a chartered accountant was, at the time, we were informed that it's one of those careers that gives you breadth in terms of commercial understanding, and it would create opportunities that are quite numerous in terms of commerce. Right. And secondly, I had a decent and comfortable knowledge of numbers and the accounting subject, and I enjoyed it. Right. And then lastly, at the time, there was a very serious shortage of black chartered accountants. So there was a sense of it would be a good opportunity that not only did I like what I was considering, not only was I reasonably good at it, it was a genuine opportunity for a career.
Right. Now, having achieved your marketing accolades at Gillette, where did you go next in your career?
In Gillette, I was in London in 2005 when I was having my breakfast cereal, watching the BBC Business News. I learned that Procter & Gamble had just bought Gillette. And that was a shock in itself, because at the time, the internal conversations at Gillette were about Gillette possibly buying other companies, not us being bought. So then what that meant is that I joined Procter & Gamble through the acquisition of Gillette. And I spent a wonderful few years at Procter & Gamble, but after about, it had been 16 years working for American multinationals, Gillette, Polaroid, and Procter & Gamble, and all in consumer goods, I decided that after 16 years, I want to grow and do something completely different. So my off-ramp was that I would work for a South African company, and I would work for any other industry other than consumer goods.
Okay.
And then My first exit landed me at Vodacom. After Vodacom, I was at Hollard. After Hollard, it became Nedbank, and today I'm at Standard Bank.
And can you tell us, you've been directing marketing at Standard Bank for a while now. What were the highlights?
Yeah, Standard Bank is relatively new in that it's 2 years.
Right.
And so far there's been more happening on the inside than has been manifested publicly. But I guess the key points that one has worked on is to refresh the marketing and communication strategy of the group.
Right.
And two, to rebuild the health of the team that I lead. And then lastly, to start laying foundations for the culture we need to win and for people to feel that it's a great place to work. So those have been the foundational things, and I guess it's fair to say let's watch the space. There's
Right.
more things planned to go outside this year.
Now, yesterday you posted on LinkedIn you had an interaction with graduates, I believe graduates that joined your team or are joining your team.
Yes, thanks for noticing the post. The post was about the Future Movers Summit,
Right.
which is an annual induction program of graduates that Standard Bank brings into the organization. The program started in 1997 with an intake of 10 graduates. This year, I think it's anything between 180 and 200.
Right.
These are top talent from different universities in different disciplines, actuarial science, accounting, economics, data science, psychology, computer sciences, and so forth. And this is not unique to Standard Bank. Different organizations do it. But what I particularly like is how well structured and how well nurtured the program is, because I mean, spending 5 days for starters, for induction, to make sure that these graduates are properly introduced into the organization and given rotational assignments until they are placed into ongoing roles. And, what I even like more about the program is that it works in that if you look at the intake of 2012, I saw a statistic that says about 58% of the people who came through the program in 2012 have since become middle or senior stroke executive managers within the organization.
Right.
Yeah.
So looking back over your career, Thulani, what would you say was a major turning point? Or maybe the major turning points?
Yes. I think it is appropriate to refer to turning points because I couldn't think of one.
Right.
The first major turning point, I would say, is the life turning point, not necessarily career. And it's when, as I mentioned earlier, I went to boarding school at 14 to go to grade 10. That was the most transformative experience of my life, and it was the beginning of the Thulani that we see today. I've mentioned already the independence. I've mentioned already the relationship with money. What I didn't mention yet is also the work ethic. At boarding school at the time, at Bethel, we used to have work hours. During the work hours, we were assigned to different parts of the school to perform manual labor. In the time I was there, I recall doing two things. One, I was one of the grass cutters with a slasher.
Right.
And then at another point, I was a garbage collector, using the tractor and going around campus collecting garbage. Those experiences at that early age, they just taught me the respect for work, and the value of work, and the importance of work. So boarding school was the first turning point of my life for the reasons that I've mentioned. And then later on, I think another turning point career-wise was when I returned to Gillette in 1999. I'm saying return because in 1997, I left Gillette to go and work for Polaroid. And then in 1999, I was invited back to work for Gillette. What was wonderful about coming back working for Gillette was that it was a business portfolio made up of, if I recall, I think there were 4 portfolios. It was blades and razors, the flagship, and the crown, of the stable. We had batteries and Oral-B. I just forget one other, but Oral-B was the smallest. And coming to lead a small part of a big stable had unique challenges that challenged me to lead in a different way, to get the support of the sales force, to get the attention of our trade customers, among other things. But the other reason why it was a key turning point, it was my first major leadership role, where I was part of what today you would describe as the executive committee of the organization. So people leadership became more central to my responsibility.
Now, you mentioned culture a number of times, Thulani.
Yes.
Would you say cross-cultural intelligence is key to leadership today?
If I had a more stronger word than key, I would use that.
Right.
I think since the 90s particularly, we are just so connected globally that it's very difficult to think only in one culture or one geography. And I would totally agree that a cross-cultural awareness at a minimum, and then beyond awareness, the attitude of embracing is the next importance. And when you have that embracing and appreciation of different cultures, it's amazing how much you can achieve working through others in a way that generates goodwill and people wanting to succeed with you and for you to succeed. And yet the opposite is in many ways very detrimental. So I would totally agree.
Right. So Thulani, what is driving you today?
Yeah, I mean, when I look back on my journey, and I also think about the things that drive me and give me energy, I think growth would be a one word of describing that.
Right.
But a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity where I was encouraged to define a purpose statement for me, which I thought was a foreign thing and yet a powerful thing. So the purpose statement that I framed for myself was as follows. My purpose is to explore possibilities, show up and excel to realize growth and success for myself and others.
Right.
So in that purpose statement, there are a few elements. One is the notion and belief in possibilities. I'm very optimistic by nature, and I embrace the view that if there is a better way, it's worth pursuing. So the issue of exploring possibilities is a key driver for me.
Right.
Excellence is one of the things I've embraced from school days. That at the end of the day, to achieve results, there's no other way but to excel at what we do. And then the last two parts, as I've said, all of these in pursuit of growth. When I look at how I've chosen companies, how I've chosen careers, and how I've exited companies, when I feel like I'm growing, I'm energized. When I stop growing, I lose interest.
Right.
And then the last part is the notion of doing things for oneself, and that extends to one's family, but also the notion of positively impacting others. So those are the things that drive me these days.
So Thulani, what does the future of leadership mean to you?
That is the most difficult question in all of this interview so far, I must admit. Yes.
I know.
And I think in a concise way, I would say future leadership is to a very large extent about succeeding in a continuously changing context.
Right.
That's how I see leadership into the future, because one of the things it's been repeated so many times and yet it remains true, is that the world is changing at an unprecedented pace, and I don't think that will change. So the challenge of leadership is to achieve success despite what feels like, shifting sands beyond your feet.
Right.
Yeah.
And Thulani, what have you learned from your own journey that you consider most important for building future leaders? And I'm asking about the qualities that you have learned have been key to your success.
Okay. I can think of a few, and these are mostly things that have personally been beneficial to me, but also I've observed and learned from others that have been an example and a model of leadership. The first one is collaboration. I'm a huge advocate for collaboration, and I firmly believe that in leadership, one of the things that one has to do is to model collaboration and also advocate and champion it in the teams that one leads. The second one is excellence. When I look back on my journey and I look back at the journeys of others, the notion of results keeps coming through, and great results seldom come without excellence. And I'm also a believer that if you're going to spend time doing it, you might as well do it well. And this has, really paid dividends in my career. The third thing is innovation. I just cannot think how any leader would, in a changing context, yet play down innovation, because if the context is changing, of necessity, you have to be changing too.
Right.
Yes. So innovation, for the longest time, has been a key element of success and leadership, and I believe even going into the future, it will remain to be one of those. Communication is another. I have seen less than capable people who communicate well succeed, and I've seen excellent people who failed because of poor communication.
Right.
So I truly believe that because we work with humans who are relational, communication is one of the key ingredients of leadership, and it's one thing that over the years And I don't remember whether I was always conscious of it, but I know at points in time I was, that I've spent time consciously understanding how I communicate, identifying how I can improve, and being aware on the effects of my communication. So I really believe that in leadership, communication is vital. And then the last two things I would say, execution. In organizations, anything that ultimately happens in the public domain, it starts somewhere as a strategy. And quite honestly, the difference and the impact of the things we do are not in the strategy document, in what we ultimately execute. So I truly believe that successful leaders not only need to be good in conceptualizing and innovating, but they have to have the operational discipline to be able to execute well. And then the last one is almost like a binder to all of these, is the notion of continuous learning. One of the things that I've made sure that I never lose is the notion of being cognizant of the fact that what you knew yesterday might be obsolete today. And because I keep referring to a changing context, there is absolutely no way you can keep moving forward without learning, because, if there's change without learning, there's a gap. And then learning closes that gap. And I think learning at an individual level is important, but also at an organizational level. And then the last dimension of learning for me, it has to do with learning from others. I would even dare say that it's absolute foolishness to think that you have a monopoly of knowledge. Wise people recognize that people around me are such a tremendous resource to learn from, and also circumstances that we go through, also they tend to have something or two to teach us.
Yeah. Now, Thulani, when you speak to aspiring leaders and maybe even your children, what is it you tell them about social media? How should they navigate and handle social media to build their own leadership brand?
Wow. I must admit, when it comes to social media, when I talk to young people, I tend to listen more to them tell me about social media than me telling them. But in the context of leadership and personally profiling yourself, what I've found relevant in my activities on social media, firstly, I must say that I'm mostly active on LinkedIn and some presence on Facebook and Instagram, but it's fair to say that my primary social media platform is LinkedIn. So in that context, I guess the first thing that I'm conscious of is just knowing who I'm engaging with. It's interesting to see that my tone on Facebook is different from LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a professional platform, and the mindset, therefore, is influenced by that. So being conscious of who you're engaging with has been one. The second thing has been about authenticity. And this is difficult because the authenticity comes with vulnerability. When one engages on social media, there are certain realities that come to mind. Firstly, it's not always a monologue of one direction. The things you say can be challenged.
Absolutely.
The things you say can be used to judge you. So there's an element of comfort with some vulnerability that's required, without which it's very difficult to be yourself, because then you will only act in a way that you think is acceptable or will avoid confrontation. And then social media has its good and its bads. And I truly believe that it's such a powerful platform that you have to choose what to use it for, and be aware that it's a record that you cannot control. Once it's out there, you've lost the control.
That's right.
So it's important to be mindful, it's important to be respectful, but there's no need to be overly cautious, because it starts affecting the authenticity.
Exactly. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Now, Thulani, what is your advice for future leaders in terms of career, building their career, and maybe guarding against pitfalls and challenges? What are the challenges you would advise future leaders that they should expect to handle and navigate in their career?
Okay. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that when I compare to the 80s, leading was much easier. For example, in the 80s, a lot of organizations had the major stakeholders being the clients and the shareholders.
Right.
You keep those two happy, you are successful. I think future leaders have to contend with new dilemmas. In organizations of today, there are multiple stakeholders, and many of them are legitimate and are powerful. However, their interests are not always in harmony. So as a leader, you have to be able to reconcile dilemmas that do not have a perfect equilibrium. I think that's the first thing. The second thing that is required from a leader is what my former CEO used to call intellectual integrity. By that, he meant seeing the world as it is, not as we wish it is. This is profoundly important, because if it is true that solving the problem starts with identifying the problem, then seeing the world as it is instead of how we wish it is, it just helps us to identify problems sooner.
Right.
It helps us to avoid burying our heads in the sand. It helps us to have a realism about the magnitude of things, the implication of things, and it's that kind of thing that often tends to drive the sense of agency. And unfortunately, when that is absent, people just give themselves a warm feeling that things are fine when they are not fine, as an example. The third challenge of leaders into the future is their ability to navigate a digital world. Anybody who's still asking whether we are in the digital world is already in a problem. It is a fact that we live in a very connected world. People rely on multiple technologies to do things that, well, create conveniences from themselves, but it also creates complexities. For example, for a marketer, life used to be so much easier. You knew that if you're on TV, you were on print, and in outdoors, you covered everybody. But people now use multiple channels. They choose when to consume your stuff or to close you out. So any future leader, although they may not be digital natives, it's incumbent on them to equip themselves to understand the digital space, to understand the levers that make the world turn,
Right.
and then by so doing, they need not be digital experts, but they will know the right questions to ask the people who are the experts that they rely on to use. And the other thing that I think is important for future leaders, we have a special group of people that I like a lot, the millennials. I think millennials get a bad rep sometimes, but any leader needs to have a multi-generational consciousness. Because earlier I spoke about multiple stakeholders that have legitimacy. It's the same as the people we lead, it's the same as the clients we serve. It's not ideal to concentrate in one because they each have different requirements. They each behave so differently. I mean, when I think of millennials, how you motivate them is extremely different from how baby boomers were motivated. And lastly, the issue of continuous learning comes to mind again. Anyone who's continuously learning reduces their blind spots. But anyone who refuses to learn, the area of blind spots just keeps increasing and increasing, and there's danger lurking when there's a huge blind spots than your clear view area.
Right. Well, you just designed a curriculum for the future leader. So would you say those are the skills needed in future?
Yes, and when I highlight these, I'm not suggesting that some are obsolete. Collaboration that I mentioned before, while critical today, it will continue to be critical in the future. I've mentioned innovation as being critical today. I still think that it will be critical into the future. The other one that I did not specifically highlight, but is implied by continuous learning, is the notion of adaptability. There is simply no way you can succeed as a leader if you're not adaptable. So adaptability is one of the key attributes or skills that one needs to have in the changing future that we are all confronted with.
Right. Now, Thulani, as a mentor to future leaders, can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored somebody, an upcoming leader, and that person took your advice to heart?
Wow, that is most difficult in that.
And you don't have to call names.
Yes. Although I have several mentees, I seldom ask for a report card on the outcomes.
Right.
So I can't think of a definitive. Mostly it tends to be behavioral. It tends to be somebody confronted with a difficult context at work, and through provocative questions and sharing personal experiences, they reframe their view and approach and then say, okay, it was not as bad, or it went better. But I'm afraid I cannot think of. Right. Yeah.
Now, Thulani is somebody who travels the world and has had many experiences across different countries. Are there any role models of leadership that you maybe have met, that you encountered in your own career, or maybe in your own community that futures leaders could learn from?
Wow. I think one leader who had a very short life that I admire is Umkhoputse Tiro. Just from a courage of conviction and pursuing what you believe in against odds. I just found his experience admirable, even though it was cut short. And when I think outside of that, I've mentioned my dad. We grew up in the context of very limited means, but we never felt limited.
Right.
My dad used to sing with different groups. He used to sing with a quartet and a choir. And it astonished me the number of countries that he had traveled for somebody who didn't have much. But the curiosity that he had, and he was an exceptional organizer. Been to several countries in Europe, in North America, and maybe that's where my travel bug came from.
Okay.
Yeah, because even now I've now been to more than 50 countries in different continents, and have been perpetually fascinated by different cultures. So he also is one of the people that I admire, and maybe if I think to my younger days, one of the leaders I admired, particularly for communication, was Martin Luther King Jr.
Right.
I just remember loving his oratory, and as young boys would recite some of his speeches and so forth. But at the core of it, he demonstrated the power of effective communication to drive and influence people to do things in a way that was unconventional, to be peaceful against violence, despite repeated evidence that the other side would not receive peace with peace.
Right.
And I think he was able to drive his agenda to a significant extent because of the power of his communication.
Right. Now, Thulani, where can our listeners follow you, and how should they connect with you?
As I said, I think my most active social media platform is LinkedIn.
Right.
And the address is my name, Thulani Sibeko.
Right.
And that's where I most engage and learn from others.
All right. And Thulani, last but not least, is there maybe one piece of advice that you would like to convey to future leaders that they should implement in their own lives?
That is profound. It's always difficult to reduce everything to one thing, but I guess what I would recommend is that in the things that we do, to never forget the why of the things we do, because in the things that we do, often there will be challenges that would make us doubt. There will be challenges that will make us weak. And in those moments, the why refocuses the mind.
Right.
Also, in the things that we pursue, there's a lot of distraction in terms of things that dilute focus, things that may sidetrack us. At face value, they look like they are part of the agenda, and the best way to test if you are still on the right way is to think of the why. So I think the power of the why is what reinforces our conviction, is what directs our focus to ensure that we don't get distracted easily.
Right. Well, Thulani, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership and reminding us that cross-cultural intelligence and collaboration and communication are key.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm only happy to share my bit in this vast journey of many experiences that we continue to learn from through exchange.
Thank you.